Hello, everyone. Sometimes the most important events in world history do not happen in front of television cameras. They do not come with dramatic speeches, emergency summits, or breaking news banners flashing across every screen. Sometimes they happen behind closed doors. A quiet meeting, a short statement, a few signatures. And yet those signatures end up changing the direction of global power for decades. That may be exactly what happened this week in Ottawa. While much of the world was focused on the ongoing tensions in the Middle East, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, rising oil prices, and the growing geopolitical confrontation between major powers, something extraordinary happened in Canada. A delegation from Qatar, one of the most important energy powers on Earth, arrived quietly in Ottawa. No media spectacle, no grand ceremony, no public negotiations. Just a handful of officials entering a meeting room and emerging with what may become one of the most consequential energy agreements of this decade. At first glance, it looked like another investment announcement. But when analysts began examining the details, a very different picture emerged. This wasn't simply Qatar investing in Canada. This wasn't simply Canada attracting foreign capital. This was something much bigger. This was one of the world's largest energy exporters effectively beginning the process of relocating part of its future energy strategy from the Persian Gulf to the Pacific coast of North America. And if that interpretation proves correct, then the implications reach far beyond natural gas, far beyond Canada, far beyond Qatar. This could represent the beginning of a fundamental restructuring of global energy geography itself. So tonight, we need to ask a critical question. Is Canada becoming the new energy insurance policy for the Gulf states? And perhaps even more importantly, what does it mean when some of America's closest strategic partners begin looking elsewhere for security and economic certainty? To understand why this agreement matters, we must first understand what happened in the Strait of Hormuz. For decades, global energy markets operated under one central assumption. The Strait of Hormuz would remain open. This narrow waterway, located between Iran and Oman, is one of the most important maritime choke points on Earth. Nearly one-third of the world's seaborne oil trade passes through it. Massive volumes of liquefied natural gas pass through it. Entire national economies depend on it. And for decades, the United States Navy played a central role in ensuring that energy continued to flow through this critical corridor. That stability became so normalized that many governments stopped treating it as a risk. It simply became an accepted fact of the global economy. But history repeatedly teaches us a dangerous lesson. The assumptions that seem most permanent are often the ones that collapse the fastest. The moment uncertainty entered the Strait of Hormuz, every major energy producer in the Gulf faced a terrifying realization. Their economies were dependent on a route they did not fully control. And for countries like Qatar, that realization was particularly severe. When people think about global energy superpowers, they often think about Saudi Arabia. But in the world of liquefied natural gas, Qatar occupies a uniquely powerful position. For years, Qatar has been the gold standard of LNG exports. The country sits on enormous natural gas reserves. Its North Field is one of the largest gas deposits ever discovered. Its LNG facilities are among the most sophisticated in the world. Its customer network stretches across Asia and Europe. Japan buys from Qatar. South Korea buys from Qatar. China buys from Qatar. India buys from Qatar. European countries buy from Qatar. For decades, Qatar became indispensable because it offered reliability. Buyers knew the gas would arrive, contracts would be honored, ships would sail, infrastructure would function. That reliability became Qatar's greatest strategic asset. But reliability only exists when transportation routes remain open. And suddenly, that certainty disappeared. The problem wasn't simply production. The problem was geography. Every LNG shipment leaving Qatar must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. There is no practical alternative route, no backup corridor, no secondary ocean access. The entire system runs through a single strategic choke point. When that choke point becomes vulnerable, the entire business model becomes vulnerable. That is the moment when Qatar began looking for alternatives, and one country stood out more than any other. Canada. For years, Canada possessed enormous energy resources. natural gas reserves, oil reserves, critical minerals, hydroelectric power, a stable political system, strong legal institutions, and perhaps most importantly, direct access to the Pacific Ocean. Yet despite possessing these advantages, Canada often struggled to fully capitalize on them. Pipeline debates delayed projects. Regulatory challenges slowed development. Political disagreements created uncertainty. Many energy opportunities remained unrealized. But geopolitical crises have a strange way of changing priorities. Suddenly, infrastructure that once seemed optional becomes strategically essential. And that's exactly what happened. Canada's Pacific Coast LNG projects began looking far more valuable. LNG Canada in Kitimat. Woodfibre, LNG.Cedar, LNG.Pipeline expansions linking Western Canadian gas fields to export terminals. These projects offered something Qatar desperately needed, a way to reach Asian customers without relying on the Strait of Hormuz. Think about the significance of that. A shipment departing British Columbia can travel directly across the Pacific. No Hormuz, no Persian Gulf, no Red Sea, no Suez Canal, no Middle Eastern conflict zones, no naval standoffs, no blockade risks. For energy buyers concerned about supply security, that advantage is enormous, and Qatar recognized it immediately. Many headlines will describe this as an investment deal. That description is technically correct, but it misses the deeper story. Because Qatar is not merely investing money. Qatar is investing strategy. The reported framework includes participation in LNG expansion projects, long-term marketing arrangements, technical cooperation, and pipeline development support. Each component matters, but together they reveal something larger. Qatar is effectively building a second platform for serving global customers, a parallel export geography, a backup system, a hedge against uncertainty. This is how major powers think. They do not wait for disasters to happen, they prepare for them. And from Qatar's perspective, Canada offers the perfect insurance policy. If Gulf exports face disruption, Canadian exports can help maintain customer relationships. If geopolitical tensions increase, Canadian production provides diversification. If traditional routes become unreliable, Pacific routes remain available. In other words, Canada is becoming part of Qatar's long-term resilience strategy. The most fascinating part of this development isn't energy. It's trust. For decades, Gulf states built their economic models around a strategic bargain. The Gulf supplied energy. The United States provided security. Everyone benefited. That arrangement created immense wealth. But recent events have raised uncomfortable questions. Not necessarily because partnerships are ending, not because alliances are collapsing, but because uncertainty has entered relationships that were once considered predictable, and uncertainty changes behavior. When investors become uncertain, they diversify. When corporations become uncertain, they diversify. When nations become uncertain, they diversify too. That is exactly what we are witnessing. The Gulf states are not abandoning existing relationships. They are reducing dependence on any single relationship. There is a huge difference, and Canada happens to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of that shift. Qatar may be first, but it is unlikely to be last. Across the Gulf region, governments are watching the same developments. They are studying the same risks. They are evaluating the same vulnerabilities, and they are reaching remarkably similar conclusions. Diversification is no longer optional. It is essential. That explains why reports increasingly point toward interest from other Gulf investors in Canadian energy infrastructure. The logic is straightforward. Canada offers political stability, strong property rights, massive natural resources, reliable institutions, Pacific market access, distance from Middle Eastern conflict zones. In an increasingly unpredictable world, those characteristics become incredibly valuable, and valuable assets attract capital. Lots of capital. For Canada, the implications are enormous. This isn't simply about jobs. It isn't simply about investment. It isn't simply about LNG exports. This is about geopolitical relevance. For decades, Canada has often been viewed as a middle power, important, respected. but rarely central to global strategic calculations. That may be changing. Energy security is becoming one of the defining issues of the 21st century. Countries that can provide secure energy supplies gain influence. Countries that host critical infrastructure gain leverage. Countries that become indispensable gain strategic weight. And Canada is increasingly positioned to play exactly that role. If Gulf capital continues flowing into Canadian energy projects, if Pacific export capacity continues expanding, if Asian demand continues growing, Canada could emerge as one of the world's most important energy security hubs, not because it planned to dominate, but because global events created an opportunity, and Canada happened to be standing in the right place at the right time. The story that unfolded in Ottawa is about much more than Qatar. It is about the future structure of global power. For generations, energy geography seemed fixed. The Gulf produced, the West protected, Asia consumed. The system worked. Today, that system is evolving, not collapsing. Evolving. New routes are emerging, new partnerships are forming, new centers of influence are appearing, and Canada is increasingly positioned at the center of those changes. The most remarkable part is how quietly it is happening. No dramatic summit, no historic treaty signing broadcast around the world, just a series of strategic decisions made by governments looking decades into the future. History often looks obvious in hindsight, but in real time, history usually arrives disguised as paperwork, a meeting room, a short statement, a seemingly routine investment announcement. Years from now, analysts may look back at this agreement and conclude that it marked the beginning of a major shift in global energy strategy. Because when one of the world's largest LNG exporters decides that part of its future must be built on Canada's Pacific coast, that is not merely an investment story. That is a geopolitical story, and it may be one of the most important geopolitical stories of this decade.